Oh my gosh, I was late and then I had to fix things. Hello, hello. We're going to be trying something new today. And I'm going to try to do a reading stream. So, how I want to do that. Hi, Zerk. Hi, Nero. Thank you so much. Yeah, I had initially turned off some settings, and it was like, oh, in order to do what you want to do, you need to turn those settings back on. So instead of playing a game, let me just make sure that yes, good and good. Hopefully, the problem with Microsoft is I need an account for Microsoft, and the account that I have. Thank you for the resub. Wow, 8 whole months. Thank you so much. Is I don't want any personal information to leak out there, so that's why Tiny Terror is being like no. So hopefully, if things go according to plan, this will work out just fine. Anywho, we're gonna start reading Alice in Wonderland, specifically the first book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and how I want this to go is I am gonna use the dictate button. So if I do this, hopefully, testing 1, 2. And then let's see how that works. Yeah, no doxing for me. No, thank you. Here, I will, Let's change the font. Okay, cool. So let us turn this back on. And let us begin. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Illustrations by John Tennell. As read by the streamer. All in the golden afternoon, full leisurely we glide, for both our oars, with little skill, by little arms are plied, while little hands make vain pretense our wanderings to guide. Ah, cruel thee, in such an hour, beneath such dreamy weather, to beg a tale of breath too weak to stir the tiniest feather. Yet what can one poor voice avail against 3 tongues together? Impetuous Prima flashes forth her edict to begin it. In gentler tones, Secunda hopes there will be nonsense in it. While Tratria interrupts the tale, not more than a minute. Anon to sudden silence won, in fancy they pursue the dream child moving through a land of wonders wild and new, in a friendly chat with bird or beast, and half believe it true. And ever, the story drained, the wells of fancy dry, and faintly strove that weary one to put the subject by. The rest next time, it is next time, the happy voices cry. Thus grew the tale of Wonderland, thus slowly one by one, its quaint events were hammered out, and now the tale is done. And home we steer, a merry crew, beneath the setting sun. Alice, a childish story take, and with a gentle hand, lay it where childhood's dreams are twined, in memory's mystic band, like pilgrims' withered wreath of flowers plucked in a far-off land. And then let's just double check. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, the idea is I'm just going to read aloud, and you can, even with my stumbles, you can follow along if you so choose. But yeah, how do you tell that this is mine? I'm going to strip over words, and they're going to be like, hey. Okay, let us begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, as well as she could, for it was a hot day and it made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasures of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that. Not did Alice think that it was so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." When she thought it over afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it all seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took out a pocket watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it, and then hurried on, Alice started to her feet. For it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it, and burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and it was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. Gonna take a quick little sippy break. Thank you. I hope this is at least somewhat entertaining, because I know some people have asked me to do something like this before. All right, let us continue. In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight on, like a tunnel for some way, and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her and wonder what was going to happen next. First she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she looked to the sides of the well, and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves here and there, and she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled Orange Marmalade, but to her great disappointment, it was empty. And she did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so managed to put it into one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this, I shan't think nothing of tumbling down the stairs. How brave they'll think I'll be at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fall off the top of the house, which was very likely true. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That would be 4,000 miles down, I think? For you see, Alice had learned several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and though this was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one to listen to her. Still, it was good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about the right distance, but then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice had not the slightest idea what latitude or longitude was either, but she thought they were nice grand words to say. Presently she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny it'll seem to come among the people that walk with their heads downwards. The antipathy. Oh, I'm going to trip over this. Antipathis, I think. She was rather glad there was no one listening at this time. She didn't sound... as it didn't sound like the right word at all. Thank you. No wonder I tripped over it. But I shall have to thank them. But I shall have to ask them what the name of the country is, you know. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? And she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy, curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think of me for asking. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written down somewhere. How very English of you to not ask for directions. Down, down, down. There's nothing else to do, so Alice began talking again. Dinah will miss me very much tonight, I should think. Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat. It's very like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, and went saying to herself, in a dreamy sort of way, do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes do bats eat cats? For you see, as she couldn't answer either question, it didn't much matter what she put into it, which way she put it. She felt that she was dozing off, and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah, and was saying to her very earnestly, Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat? When suddenly, thump, thump, down came the heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped up to her feet. In a moment, she looked up, and it was all dark overhead. Before her was another long passage, and the White Rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away Alice went like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say around a turn as it turned a corner. Oh, my ears and whiskers! How late it's getting! She was close behind when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hallway, which was lit up by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. Oh, I'm being doubled? Thank you. I'll try to fix it. And let's just go to the audio source. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, okay. Is this better? Or am I still doubled? Oh, thank you. That was the entire idea, is I wanted subtitles for me reading. Okay, so I think what happened... Here, we'll go back to default. We'll go OK. And then we'll go back to the headset mic. I hope this works. If not, I have one other way to try to fix it. Why is it worse? Okay. 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 Is it better? Okay. Thank you. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked, and when Alice had been all the way down one side to the other, trying every door, she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how she was ever going to get out again. Suddenly she came upon a three-legged table, all made of solid glass, and there was nothing in it but a tiny golden key. And Alice's first idea was that this might belong to one of the doors in the hall. But alas, either the locks were too large or the key was too small. But at any rate, it would not open any of the... Oh, hello. Hello, kitty. But it would not open any of them. However, on the second time around, she came upon a low curtain she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She had tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fitted. Alice opened the door and found that it led into a small passage not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage into the loveliest garden you ever saw. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander about among those beds of bright flowers and those cool fountains. But she could not even get her head through the doorway. And even if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it would be very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think if I could, I only know how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think very few things indeed were really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table, half hoping that she might be able to find another key in it, or at any rate, a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle on it, which certainly had not been there before, said Alice. And tied round the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words "Drink Me" beautifully printed on large letters. It was all very well to say "drink me," but wise little Alice was not going to do that. Not going to do that in 100 years. In a hurry. No, I'll look first, she said, and see whether it's marked poison or not. For she had read several nice little stories about children who had gotten burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rules their friends had taught them, such as that a red-hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and that if you cut your finger very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that. If you drink much from a bottle marked poison, it's almost certain to a degree to disagree with you sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it very nice. It had, in fact, a sort of flavor mixed of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast, which she soon finished off. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. This is very much an experiment, but as long as people are enjoying, and I don't mind at all. Because my idea is I'll finish a chapter and then give my commentary on the chapter because I know a lot about Alice in Wonderland. It's one of my favorite stories. Good. I'm glad everybody's cozy. That's the idea. We're still in chapter 1, by the way. What a curious feeling, said Alice. I must be shutting up like a telescope. Oh, it would probably help if I put the lights on. Yeah, that's better. And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened up as if at the thought that she was now the right size for going through the little door into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little nervous about this, "For it might end, said Alice to herself, in going out altogether like a candle. I wonder what it should be like then." And she tried to fancy what a flame of a candle looked like after the candle was blown out, for she could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more happened, she decided on going to the garden once more. But alas for poor Alice! When she got to the door, she found she had forgotten the little golden key, and when she went back to the table for it, she found she could not possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up on the top of the legs of the table, but it was too slippery, and when she tired herself out while trying, the poor little thing sat down and cried. "Come, there's no use crying like that," said Alice to herself rather sharply. "I advise you to leave off this minute." She generally gave herself very good advice, though she very seldom followed it. And sometimes she scolded herself so severely as to bring tears into her eyes. And once she remembered trying to box her own ears for having cheated herself in a game of croquet, and she was playing against herself. For this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. "But it's no use now," thought poor Alice, "to pretend to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough for me to make one respectable person." Soon her eyes fell on the little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it, and found it a very small cake, which the words "Eat Me" were beautifully marked in currants. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way, I'll get to the garden, and I don't care which happens." She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, "Which way? Which way?" holding her hand on the top of her head to feel which way it was growing. And she was quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. To be sure, this is what generally happens when one eats cakes, but Alice had gotten so much in the way of expecting nothing but out of the way things to happen that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in the common way. So she set to work and very soon finished off the cake. And so that is the end of chapter 1. Oh, you've never read it before? Yeah, I didn't read this until I was in my teens, actually. But I really liked it. Just because, it's just a really interesting little book, and that, the poem at the very beginning was basically, Lewis Carroll recounting how the story came to be, which was basically, he was a math teacher at, Oxford back in the day, and, Alice was a real little girl named Alice Little, and she had two older sisters at the time, and then a bunch of younger siblings. But it's the three eldest daughters that are most commonly mentioned. Basically, they all went for an afternoon picnic on July 4th. That's what the golden afternoon was, even though it was actually quite dreary. And they were like, "Hey, tell us a story." And so he did. He just kinda... That's why Alice is named after Alice Little. So he came up with the story based off of, their commentary and such. And then Alice said, "Write it down." And that's how we got Alice's Adventures Under the Ground. And then he elaborated on it a little bit further. Like, there are a couple scenes that were never in the original. But yeah, it's a story for children. And I love it because it goes with the randomness of, have you tried to entertain 3 children under 10? I think was it Edith? No, I think Edith was the middle sister. But yeah, I think the oldest was 12 and Alice was like 7. Anyway. But yeah, that's part of the reason why it just is like, oh, Alice was bored, and then just everything happens. You cannot have the book. I need it. You nerd. You cannot have my tiny little book. I have a bigger tome, but I'll probably use that for if we ever do Alice Through the Looking Glass. But yeah, you'll notice that there are a lot of little Victorianisms in this thing. Yeah, she wants to read chapter 2. Yeah. Which, speaking of, Chapter 2, The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for a moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. Now, I'm opening up like the largest telescope ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they all seemed to be almost out of sight, and they were going so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put your shoes on and stockings on for you, my dears. I'm sure I shan't be able to. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You might manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want them to. Let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she went on planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought. And how funny it'll seem sending presents to one's own feet. And how odd the directions will look like. Alice's right foot, Esquire, heart rug, near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just at this moment, her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice. It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side, to look through the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever, and she sat down and began to cry again. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice. A great girl like you, she might as well say this, to go on crying this way. Stop this moment, I tell you. But she went on the same way, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep, and reached halfway down the hall. After a time she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I keep her waiting? Alice felt so desperate she was ready to ask for help of anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, If you please, sir. The rabbit stared violently, dropped the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. Oh dear, how queer everything is today, and yesterday things were on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same size when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's a great puzzle. and she began thinking over all the children she knew that were the same age as herself, to see if she could have been changed into any of them. "I'm not sure I'm Ada," she said, "for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and oh, she doesn't know she knows such very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling this is. I'll try to see if I know the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is... oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at this rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify it. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. And Rome... no, that's all wrong. I'm certain I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little... And she crossed her hands on her lap, as if she were saying lessons to begin to repeat it, but her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come out the way they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly he spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, and oh, ever so many lessons to learn. Now I've made up my mind about it. I'm Mabel. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use putting their heads down and saying, come up again, dear. I shall only look up and say, who am I then? Tell me that first. And then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else. But oh dear, Alice cried with a sudden burst of tears, I do wish they would put their heads down. I am so very tired of being all alone here. And as she said this, she looked down at her hands, and what a surprise to see there, she put on one of the White Rabbit's little kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that? She thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that it was nearly, as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she soon dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. That was a narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now, for the garden. She ran all the way, with all speed back to the little door, but alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying on the glass table as before. And things are worse than ever, thought poor Alice. For I was never so small as this before, never, and I declare, it's too bad that it is. As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea, and in that case, I can go back by the railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that whenever you go to the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, and then a row of lodging houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam about trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing to say, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she heard some splashing about in the pool a little way off. And when she swam nearer to make out what it was, at first she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus. But then she remembered how small she was, and it soon made it that it was only a mouse. that had slipped in like herself. Yeah, now she's asleep at story time. That's good. Yes. Yes. Alright, continuing with chapter 2. Would it be of any use now, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk at any rate. There's no harm in trying, so she began. Oh, Mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here. Oh, Mouse. Alice thought this must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen it in her brother's Latin grammar. A mouse of a mouse to a mouse, oh mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, and seemed to her to wink one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse. Come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no clear notion of how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. Oi, est mon chat, which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over in fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, Alice cried hastily, afraid that she had hurt the poor little animal's feelings. I quite forgot you don't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, perhaps not, Alice said in a soothing tone. Don't be angry about it. And yet, I wish I could show you our Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She is such a dear, quiet thing, Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam hazily about in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. And such a nice... Oh, hold on. And she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse, and she's such a capital one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must be really offended. We won't talk about her any more, if you'd rather not. Why, we indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of its tail, as if I would talk on the subject matter. Our family has always hated cats, nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear that name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There's such a nice little dog near our house. I should show it to you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, and it's such with long curly brown hair.
Cheer one, cheer one, cheer one, cheer one.
Oh, thank you for the penny, Zerk. I appreciate it. She honestly sounded like me when I'm talking about Hazel. Such a nice little kitty I've got. Such a nice little friend. And it'll fetch things when you throw them. And it'll sit up and beg for its dinner and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them. And it belongs to a farmer, you know. And he says it's so useful it's worth £100. He says it kills all the rats and, oh dear, Alice said in a sorrowful tone, I'm afraid I've offended it again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could go, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it, Mouse, dear, do come back. We won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to its face, quite pale. With passion, Alice thought. And it said in a low, trembling voice, Let us go to the shore, and I shall tell you my history, and you'll understand why I hate cats and dogs. It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and the animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck, a dodo, a lory, and an eagle. An eaglet. And several other curious creatures. Alice led down the way. The whole party swam to the shore. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 2. Did I? Pennies. I'm so glad for pennies. So, chapter 2. Chapter 2 is full of weirdness. And I kind of like it. Oh, no worries. Go feed them creatures. Go feed all your friends. Yeah. Yeah, chapter 2 introduces a lot of the, some of the more iconic things. Like the Curiouser and Curiouser, the Pool of Tears. Thank you. I appreciate your pennies. No worries. And I really like the conversation with the mouse where it's just like, oh no, I keep bringing up like cats and dogs and things that will hunt this mouse, and I'm trying not to drown, but I might offend the mouse, so it might drown me instead. It's just a silly little thing that sort of progresses the plot. Let's see. Take another little sip, and I think I'll do one more chapter. Maybe 2. Because yeah, how many chapters are in this? I'm not getting through the whole book today. That would be a lot. Okay, there are 13 chapters, so if I do about 4 per stream, that'll take 3-ish streams to finish. Yeah, let's aim for that. Let's aim for about 4 chapters this stream. That should be about an hour and a half-ish. 12-hour stream just reading. I mean, I certainly could try it one day, but I might die. Okay, let us begin with chapter 3. Chapter 3. A caucus race and a long tail. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank. The birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clung close to them, all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how were they to get dragon? They all had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them, as if she had known them all her life indeed. As she had quite a long argument with the lory, who had last turned sulky, and would only say, "I'm older than you, and you must know better." And this Alice would not allow, without knowing how old it was, and that the lorry positively refused to tell its age, with no more to be said. Okay. So, all of these birds, and the like, yeah, the oldest sister was the reference was Lori. I want to say her name was like Lorraine. And then the eaglet is Edith, the second oldest sister, and the dodo was the one of the inserts for Lewis Carroll, because his real name was actually Charles Ludwig Dodgson, and so he's Dodo. And then there was a duck, because one of the people on the picnic was actually named Duckworth, which I think is like the best thing. His name is Duckworth, so he's a duck. And then let's see what else. What other? There was, I think there was and several other creatures. But yeah, they're all references to the people that were on that boat ride when he first told the story. Yeah, Duckworth is a great name. Honestly, it's how did they not use it in DuckTales? Honestly, it's right there. At last the mouse, who seemed to be a person of some authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." And they all sat down at once in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt for sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. "Ahem!" said the mouse with a very important air. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all around, if you please." William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted by the English, who wanted leaders and had been of late much accustomed to the usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar and the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. "Ugh," said the lorry with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said the lorry hastily. "I thought you did," said the mouse. "I proceed. Edwin and Morcar and the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria declared for him, and even Stickgrand, the periodic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable." "Found what?" said the duck. "Found it," replied the mouse rather crossly. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means well enough when I find a thing," said the duck. "It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct was at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans. How are you getting on, my dear?" it continued, turning to Alice as it spoke. "As wet as ever," Alice said in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem to make me dry at all." In that case, said the dodo, solemnly rising to his feet, "I move that the meeting adjourn for this immediate adoption of a more energetic remedies." "Speak English," said the eaglet. "I don't know the meaning of half of these long words. And what's more, I don't believe you do either." And the eaglet bent down in its head to hide a smile. Some other birds tittered audibly. "What I was going to say," said the dodo, in an offended tone, "was that the best thing to do to get us dry would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" said Alice. Not that she much wanted to know, but the dodo had paused, as if it thought somebody ought to speak. But no one else seemed inclined to say anything. "Why," said the dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it. And, as you might like to try the thing yourself in some wintry day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it." First, it marked out a race course in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, and away, but they all began running when they liked and left off when they liked. So that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so, they were all quite dragging. The dodo suddenly called out, "The race is over!" And they all crowded around, panting and asking, "But who's won?" The question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it stood for a very long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position of which you usually see in Shakespeare in the pictures of him. While the rest waited in silence, at last the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who's going to give the prizes?" quite the chorus of the voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the dodo, pointing Alice with one finger. And the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair, she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily, the salt water had not gotten to it. These are basically mints. And handed them out as a round of prizes. There was exactly one apiece for all around. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo replied gravely. "What else could you have got in your pocket?" It went on, turning to Alice. "Only a thimble," Alice said suddenly. "Hand it over," said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more, while the dodo solemnly presented her the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of the elegant thimble." And when it had finished the sword speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing was very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she dared not laugh. And she could not think of anything to say. She simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they all went down again and sat in a ring, and begged the mouse to tell them something more. "You promised to tell me your history, you know. And you know why you hate C and D," she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice, sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" She kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so her idea of the tale was something like this. Fury said to a mouse that he met in the house, "Let us both go to law. I will promise. Cute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have the trial. For really, this morning I've nothing to do," said the mouse to the cur. "Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury, no judge, would be wasted in our breath. I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said cunning old Fury. "I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death." All of that is in the shape of the mouse's tail. "You're not attending," said the mouse to Alice severely. What are you thinking of? I beg your pardon, Alice said very humbly. You'd got to the fifth bend, I think. I had not, cried the mouse, very sharply. A knot, said Alice, always ready to make herself useful, and looking anxious about her. Oh, do let me help you undo it. I shall do nothing of the sort, said the mouse, getting up and walking away angrily. You insult me by talking such nonsense. I didn't mean it, pleaded poor Alice. But you're so easily offended, you know. The mouse only growled in reply. Please come back and finish your story, Alice called after it, and the others joined in a chorus. Yes, please do. But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. What a pity it wouldn't stay longer, said the lorry as soon as it was quite out of sight. And an old crab took the opportunity of saying to his daughter, Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to you to never lose your temper. Hold your tongue, Ma, said the young crab, a little snappishly. You're enough to try the patience of an oyster. I wish I had Dinah here. I know I do, said Alice, aloud, addressing no one in particular. She'd soon fetch it back. And who is Dinah? I might venture asking the question, said the lorry. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. Dinah's our cat. And she's such a capital one for catching mice, you can't think. And oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as to look at it. The speech caused a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old magpie had been wrapping itself very carefully, remarked, I really must get going home. The night air doesn't suit my throat. And the canary called out in a trembling voice to its children, Come away, my dears. It's high time you all went to bed. On various pretexts, they all moved off, and Alice was soon left alone. I wished I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said to herself in a melancholy tone. Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more. And poor little Alice began to cry again, for she soon felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she began to hear the pattering of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed its mind and was coming back to finish its story. And that should be the end of chapter 3. Yes, will do. So all of that was basically a giant pun on English politics about how everybody's running around and nothing gets done. Because the caucus race is a real thing. Hi. And it was just I think it was just a thing to be like, oh look, here's all our friends who went on the picnic with us in the story, just as a nice little nod. All right, let's do chapter 4. Chapter 4. The rabbit sends in a little bill. It was the white rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, the Duchess, oh my dear paws, oh my furs and whiskers. She'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves. She had very good-naturedly begun hunting about for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall, with the great glass table, and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice, and went hunting about, and called for her in a very angry tone. Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now!" Alice was so much frightened that she ran off, and at once in the direction it pointed to without trying to explain the mistake that it had made. "He mistook me for his housemaid," she said to herself, and ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better take him his fan and gloves. That is, if I can find them." As soon as she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she should meet the real Marianne and be turned out of the house before she found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, "to be going on a message for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah will be sending me on messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly, and get ready for your walk. Come in a minute. Nurse, I've got to watch this mouse hole till Dinah comes back, and see that the mouse doesn't get out. Only I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dinah stop at the house if it began ordering people about like that." But this time she found her way into the tidy little room with the table by the window. Table in the window, and on it, she had hoped, a fan and two or three pairs of tiny white kid gloves. As she took up the fan and the pair of gloves, and was about to go leave the room, when her eyes fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label, but this time there was no label with the words "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting will happen for sure," she said to herself, "whether I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for I really am quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found herself with her head pressed against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much. Alas, it was too late to wish that." She went on growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute, there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down, with one elbow against the door, and the other arm curled around her head. Still she went on growing, and as the last resort she put her arm out the window, and her foot out the top of the chimney, and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance at her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened. And now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone, and at least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, I shall never get any older than I am now. That's a comfort in one way. I'll never be an old woman. But then, always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shan't like that. "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered herself. "How can you learn your lessons in here? Why, there's hardly any room for you, and no room for any lesson books." And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation for altogether. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. "Marianne," said the voice. "Marianne, fetch me my gloves, this moment." Then came the little pattering feet to the stairs, and Alice knew the rabbit was coming to look for her. And she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came up to the door, and tried to open it. As the door opened inwards, and Alice's elbows was pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice said to herself, or heard it say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice. And after waiting till she fancied she'd heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch at the air. She was not getting a hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek, and a fall, and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was possible it had fallen into the cucumber frame, or something of that sort. Next, in an angry voice, the rabbit's, "Pat! Pat! Where are you?" And then a voice she'd never heard before. "Sure then, I'm here, digging apples, Your Honor." "Digging for apples, indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds more like the sounds of more broken glass. Now tell me, Pat, what's in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, Your Honor." He pronounced it arum. "It's an arum, Your Honor." "An arm? You goose! Whoever saw that one of that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, Your Honor, but it's an arum for that." "Well, it's got no business there. At any rate, go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, "Sure don't like it, Your Honor," and all that. "Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she spread out her hand again, and made another snatch at the air. This time it was there were two little shrieks, and more sounds of broken glass. What number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. And for putting me in the window, I only wish they could. Or pulling me out the window. I'm sure I don't want to stay here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last came the rumbling of little cartwheels and the sound of a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the words, "Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Put him up in the corner. No, time together first. They don't reach half high enough yet. Oh, well, that'll do enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind, that's a loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." A loud crash. "Now who did that?" It was Bill. "I fancy who's going to go down the chimney." "Nay, I shan't. You do it." "That I won't. Bill's got to go down. Here, Bill. The master said you have to go down to the chimney." "Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he?" Alice thought to herself. "Aye, they seem to be putting everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. The fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick it a little." She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could, and waited till she heard the little animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about the chimney close above her, and saying to herself, "This is Bill." She gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was the general chorus of, "There goes Bill!" And the rabbit's voice alone, "Catch him! Catch him, you by the hedge!" And then silence. Then another confusion of voices. Hold up the head. Brandy now, don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened? You tell us about it." Thus came the feeble little squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more. Thank ye. I'm better now. I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is Something comes up at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I goes, like a skyrocket. So you did, old fellow, said the others. We must burn this house down, said the rabbit's voice. And Alice called out as loud as she could, If you do, I'll set Dinah on you. And there was dead silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take off the roof. After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, A barrelful will do, to begin with. A barrelful of what? Thought Alice, as she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little petals came rattling at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and she shouted out, You better not do that again, which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. If I can eat one of those cakes, she thought, it might make some changes to my size, and as I can't possibly make me any larger, it might make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes, and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly, and as soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard Bill was in the middle of being held up by two guinea pigs who were giving it something out of a bottle. They were all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself in the thick of the wood. The first thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself as she walked about in the wood, is to grow to my right size again, and the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that would be the best plan. It sounded like an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she hadn't the smallest idea about how to set about it, and while she was peering anxiously among the trees, a sharp little bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, and feebly stretching out one paw, trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alice in a coaxing tone. She tried hard to whistle for it, but she was terribly frightened all the time at the thought of it might be hungry, in which case it would be very likely to eat her up in spite of all of her coaxing. Yes! You made the 40 cakes reference, and I am so happy! Yay! Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of a stick and held it out to the puppy. Whereupon the puppy jumped into the air, off all its feet at once, with a yelp of delight, and rushed at the stick, and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, and tumbled head over heels, and to hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game of play with a cart horse, was expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran around the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick.
running a very little way forward each time, and a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good ways off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth, and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice to be a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once, and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's barks sounded quite faint in the distance. "And yet, what a dear little puppy it was," said Alice, as she leaned against a buttercup to rest herself and fan herself with one of the leaves. "I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if I've only been the right size to do so. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see. How is this to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other. But the great question is, what?" The great question certainly was, what? And Alice looked all around her at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she could not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, and when she had looked under it, and on both sides of it behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on top of it, with its arms folded quietly smoking a long hookah, and taking not the smallest notice of her or anything else. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 4, and that is probably where I will stop. It is a great reference, and I love that reference because it's very silly. Yeah, because was it in a little golden book? Let's see. So, thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that was enjoyable. I'm going to do a little bit of commentary, just because there was so much, like, size changing going on and all that. And, apparently the fact that the rabbit was wealthy enough to have a staff is quite interesting. Because, yeah, there was a lot of speculation about Marianne. Like, I know what I would do with the character, what I'm planning to do with the character. But that was actually just a term for a housekeeper back in the day. But if you're like me, and it's like, oh, wait, actual character, there is actually a comic from, early 2000s? There was a Disney-branded comic called Wonderland that dealt with the White Rabbit's maid, who was Marianne, and she carried around a magical duster. And she was a human. And it was a fun little thing. I'm gonna do a different character interpretation at some point, because that may or may not be one of my nano projects. Hi, Soul. Thank you, you complete nerd. But thank you. I always appreciate you. Just for that, you get the tomato. Thank you, Soul. But yeah, so let's see. We've got the rabbit and his staff, meaning all the different little animals around his house. Alice changing size, which it's a very common interpretation to say that Alice in Wonderland is all about puberty. What with she's constantly changing size and not quite being the right size and this, that, and whatever. I think it's just it's just a fun little addition, but that is certainly
a reading. You'll find that with a lot of interpretations of Alice in Wonderland, they kind of try to take the whimsy out of it and have it be more about logic, which is still, it's a valid interpretation. It's just not an interpretation that I personally subscribe to. It's like, I'm just like, again, have you ever tried to entertain 3 children likely under 12? The nonsense really works for kids, and I think that's part of the reason why it's remained popular for, I want to say it was first published in like 1884. Don't quote me on that year thing, but it's been popular for over 100 years. Which, really says something about the staying power of certain stories. Whether or not they age well is a completely different thing, but, the classics have their own merits, and they're classics for a reason. A lot of it comes down to who decided what the classics were, which is a valid criticism. Because it's like how everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people in the United States will read To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's like, To Kill a Mockingbird is a great book. But I completely understand the argument of, let's update the literature to have it be a little bit more current. Because at this point, To Kill a Mockingbird is getting up there in years. So it's like, you can make your same point and read different books. It's all good. Anyway, that was me being a library worker. Let's see. There we go. I want to see. So I think we'll just pop over to the ending screen real quick. Because, I think about 4 chapters. I might do 5 chapters when we get close to finishing. But I think 4 chapters is a good stopping point, because I feel the energy is leaving me. But thank you all for joining me on this experiment. I hope... Oh yeah, no, we absolutely need to update the literary canon. It's like, the old works are all well and good. Head boop. Yes. But, there are plenty of new works that are just as valid. But yeah, let's see who we can rate today. Thank you all for joining me on this experiment. I hope it was enjoyable, because I had fun with this. But yeah, let's see who we can raid. Let's see here. We've got Just Chatting. We've got Final Fantasy 16. We've got Sonic Frontiers. We've got Armored Core. We've got Sound Vortex. What are y'all feeling today? Okay, anything? Well, we'll do a little roulette. We will do a little roulette, and the roulette will stop here. Oh, we're doing the Just Chatting stream, which means we're going to Shira.
Oh, I have the best idea. Thank you.
Cheer 1 so cute.
We'll use this. Okay, I'll send you all off. Have fun. Thank you all for joining me.